Alright, good afternoon. Today we're going to be replacing the knock sensor on a 2003 Nissan Frontier with the V6 non-supercharged. It's going to be the 3.3 liter V6 here. What we're going to do is we're going to start, as always, by disconnecting the negative battery lead. In this case, I actually have the positive disconnected. Shouldn't be a problem there. We're going to put it up on jack stands with a chalk block in the rear, and e-brake on. Before we do anything, what I like to do is I like to give it a good shake just to make sure that we know it's not going to fall on top of us. Next step normally is going to be to drain the coolant. Right now I have a hot engine, so we're going to work on some other things while it cools down. Then we can drain the coolant so we don't get it all over ourselves when we start dipping into the coolant lines there. First step that we're going to do is remove the upper intake plenum, which is this piece right here. What I like to do is I'm just going to disconnect everything I need to and flop it over upside down. So we're going to end up taking off the cruise control cable. There's a bunch of miscellaneous vacuum hoses and smog related equipment. Important thing to do here is to make sure that you take a picture if you want. Find some way to remember which way everything goes before you start tearing into things, because the last thing you want to do is end up with random hoses that you can't figure out where they go. Second thing that you want to try to do is remove things in assemblies. So like in this instance, this hose right here, the tube that goes from the mass airflow sensor to the throttle body, has all these little hoses coming off of it. So what I'd like to do is maybe disconnect this side here, and I'll disconnect this side here, so that you have one hose on this side and then you have another hose coming over to this side. Things like this right here, this is going to be a like a baffling system to quiet the throttle noise. You can just disconnect it and leave it in there. It's going to be more trouble than it's worth to remove. So just get that disconnected, and we're going to get this exposed. Next thing we're going to do is the cruise control cable right here. Take it off that bell crank, and then any of these wires or anything here, we're actually going to do an ignition tune-up. So I'll end up just completely removing the cap and the spark plug wires here. So as we go along, what we'll do is we'll get the major obvious stuff disconnected, and then we're going to take all the bolts off that bolt the upper plenum to the lower plenum, and then just try to work our way over and flop it over. We're going to run into things like these hoses down here that are going to be connected to stuff underneath. So as we go, we're just going to take them off one at a time, making sure that we keep track of what's connected to what, so that we get it all put back together the way it needs to be. I'm going to get started and check in with you in a minute when I get all this done. Quick tip though, for anybody who hasn't removed one of these before, basically what you're going to do to remove this little pin system here is you're going to move this bell crank to wide open throttle, and then you just push this little pin out. It's going to let you remove that throttle cable or cruise control cable a lot easier than anything else. So like I said, I'll check back with you in just a minute here. Okay, here's a little update. After about 10 or 15 minutes of disassembly, this is what we're looking at right here. So we went ahead and took off the distributor cap and all the wires so that we can get this exposed here. As I mentioned before, we disconnected that intake tube, the baffle, and just those little hoses that go over here to the intake for the PCV system. Cruise control is off to the side, and then you can see this big wiring harness right here. The really cool thing about working on seasoned vehicles here is after a while of just being heat cycled, everything's going to naturally lay in the way that it was taken off. So don't be afraid of disconnecting these wires here, all these sensors, fuel injection system and so forth, because once you go to put it all back together, everything's just going to naturally lay where it needs to. So I mean, as you can see right here, MAF sensor, compressor, the distributor, all those little sensors and things like that. But for now, we're just going to lay it off to the side. So the first problem that we ran into here, you can see these bolts right here. These are hex head bolts, or they require an Allen wrench to remove. I'm not sure if we can get a good enough picture right here, but you can kind of see this is scarred and stripped. So I was able to take off the other bolts, 3 out of the 5 bolts, but this one here and this one here were already rounded out. So I was kind of worried at first that it was something I had done, but then one of these bolts I took out, you can see right here there's anti-seize on these threads, and that isn't factory. So this has already been dug into once before, and either they over tightened it, or maybe just kind of mangled it up when they first took it out, and it was just kind of the last straw. So what we're going to end up having to do is drill these heads out and pop off the plenum, and then later what we'll do is we'll just get some vice grips or something, and we'll actually just thread out that stud by itself. We're going to need to end up making a hardware store run to find replacement bolts for that, but that's not something that's going to need to be done until a little bit later here. I think that's about it for now. I'm going to go ahead and pause it and then wait until I get that plenum off, and then we'll go a little bit further here. Okay, here we are starting up again. As you can see, the plenum's been removed. I have it down here laying on the ground. It's actually pretty easy to just disconnect the rest of the stuff so that we have it completely out of the way. We don't have to work around it. As you can see right here, these little black tubes, these are coolant passages. They're going to be going up here into the throttle body, back into the intake plenum, and then you're going to return out here. This is like emissions related stuff. Vehicles that don't really get a lot of maintenance, you're going to see corrosion in here. As you can see close up to here in this decel valve, you have corrosion coming out. These things tend to rust from the inside out, and the thinner tubes are going to clog on you. I see that problem quite a bit with Fords, but these being a little bit bigger tubes shouldn't really have too much of a problem there. But these are two things to keep in mind, because these are on the back of the plenum. This is what it looks like from above. You have your throttle body right here. So these two little hoses back here, they can be kind of a pain in the butt to get off, especially when you have that corrosion here that's kind of fusing the rubber hose to the steel here. So what I ended up doing was I took a flat blade screwdriver, and I just kind of made my way around here to break that seal a little bit, and then these things slid off. When you're going to go to reassemble these, make sure you clean these off with like a wire brush or something like that to make sure that you're not ending up with leaks, especially really hard to locate leaks like these right here. A total beast to get out. Right here we do also have a vacuum tube, so make sure you get that reconnected when you go to assemble it, along with two different electrical connectors. Again, very important on this right here. It does look like it is something smog related, but you want to make sure you're not getting a check engine light or anything like that. That's going to ruin your day. Actually, the stepper motor almost looks like an IAC. I don't see one up here, so that is possible, but I'm not going to make any guarantees. I'm not too familiar with this engine here. Last spot we left, we had a couple of bolts that we had to drill out. Just so happened that I had a pretty close matching drill bit, so what I ended up doing was just went right down the center, ended up drilling the head out. These things did have a good amount of tension on them for whatever reason. I think one of them actually had some RTV on it, so it ended up looking like this. When I popped the manifold, the upper plenum off, just reach in there, grab it, and twist it off. Now this intake gasket that I pulled off is actually going to be a Felpro brand, so that's a little bit further proof that this motor's been disassembled in the past. There was a gray RTV going across there, so it's no surprise that it's going to be contaminated in the bolt heads, making things a little bit more difficult to remove. Next step that we had was to disconnect the fuel injector harness. It's going to be a lot easier said than done. Now this one actually loops around. You'll see the main input right here. It's going to loop around, but then the ends of these harnesses here actually drop down to the back of the block. Now I don't want to get into messing with that stuff, so what I prefer to do always is just flip it off to the side so that we don't have to deal with it. So I flip this off over the side here. I'm going to climb up into the engine bay, get these wires out of the way, get them around the hoses there, and as you can see, it's pretty easy access there. Next thing that I did was I unscrewed. There's more Allen head bolts, 4 of them back here, that are going to hold this fuel injection rail on, and just go ahead and move this out as an assembly as well. Okay, as you can see, I've already taken this out. There's going to be rubber grommets. They're going to be in each injector hole. I'm not sure with the sunlight if we can see them, but pretty obvious. You're going to have 6 rather large holes, and they're going to have rubber grommets in there. That's going to be sealing the injector to the intake manifold. Might be a good time to check those things, make sure they're not dry rotted, make sure you're not going to have any leaks, because if you end up with leaks upon disassembly, or reassembly rather, you're going to end up with a huge headache having to take this all back apart again for some stupid $2 gaskets. So anytime you run into that stuff, just make sure that you get it replaced rather than hope for the best. So right now you see we have a pretty clear picture of the lower intake manifold. It's going to be pretty easy right now. We're going to have 4 bolts on either side here that we're going to remove. 4 bolts either side. You're going to have, looks like 4 Allen heads, 4 12-point. Once those are popped off, this is, I believe, a wet intake manifold, meaning once we pop that seal, we're going to end up with coolant flowing out of the bottom of the block, or pardon me, flowing out the sides of the cylinder heads down to the bottom there. And the reason I believe that, again, I'm not super familiar with this motor, but here we have our brand new Felpro gaskets. You can see these oval-shaped passages here. That usually indicates some sort of coolant or liquid passing through here. And of course, we have the air passageways there. So I'm going to show you a little trick when we go to reassemble this. One other point of caution that I did want to make: when you do drill these bolt heads out, you can see right here it did break off fairly cleanly. You want to select a bit that's going to fit just inside the Allen head hole right there. The one I had was just a little bit bigger, so it was able to easily center itself, drill down into the head there. And I'm not sure if I can find it. If I can, here it is. So as you can see right here, pretty much cleanly machined out. What it ended up doing was just going right through it all the way to the bolt head, and it just popped right off. The second one, I wasn't able to get as far. I didn't have a whole lot of leverage just because it was so far back in the intake manifold, or in the engine bay. So what I ended up doing was I drilled as far as I could, and I just kind of gave this a little karate chop right here. As you can see, that's a whole lot of leverage on those bolts right there. So this was the bolt that I had to drill out back here. I drilled it out as much as I could, and just, be reasonable. Don't wreck your intake manifold. Don't put scratches and Mars in the mating surface there. So I just kind of gave it a little tap right here. That head actually just popped off and shot off into nowhere. So that's about it right there. I'm going to go ahead and drain the coolant, pull it apart. You'll probably get one more view of just the bare cylinder head itself, and then we're going to go into replacing that knock sensor and talking about why it fails. So I'll check back with you in just a minute. Okay, so here we are. I just finished removing the lower intake plenum here. As you can see, we got the lower gaskets right here, one on each side. These guys actually look like some sort of cheaper paper style gasket. I'm not sure if they're Felpro or maybe it's just the way I'm feeling it. But they do look like they've been replaced in the past at some point. In fact, yep, there we go. Felpro sign right there upside down. So these are replacement. These aren't factory. Whoever did them did it dry. I prefer to usually put some sort of a sealant on there. We'll get into that a little bit later, but if you don't use a sealant, you're going to end up running into corrosion issues. Later down the line, you're going to have leaks. Down here at the very bottom of the valley here, you're going to see that guy right there. That's the whole root of the problem, which is the factory knock sensor. I'm not sure if this is the factory one or not. This is actually a friend of mine's vehicle, but I'm looking down here at it, and there's a small hairline fracture there at the tip of the bolt. I think you can kind of see it. Let me get my finger in there. Yeah, there's the tip of the crack right there. So what happens to these things right here over time? Let me go ahead and pull out this replacement joker I got. This is the replacement knock sensor here. Essentially what these are, for all intents and purposes, is a spring with 2 contacts in the middle. And what it is this spring is basically tuned so that when there's some sort of a detonation, usually spark knock, it's going to sense that because you're going to get a rattle. And that rattle is going to move the spring, or it's going to overcome the spring and make it make contact. And that's going to tell the computer there that there's detonation. It needs to back off the timing so that you're not going to have cylinder damage. Okay, so with Nissans, apparently these are a pretty common issue. This guy right here has about 130,000 miles on it. Not a whole lot, but You know, I've heard of people on the forums losing these things 50, 70,000 miles. So as you can see, all the trouble that we went through to get here, it is a kind of a pain in the butt. Easy workaround for that is going to be to move the sensor, which is I think what we're going to end up doing here tonight. So a lot of guys, what they'll end up doing is they're going to cut the harness and they're going to move it up. I don't recommend that. I don't like doing that. It's going to be difficult to solder back there, and if you're using a crimp fitting, you're just asking for trouble later, especially if you live in wet areas where it snows. Here we live in California, not so much of an issue, but I mean, it took me all of about an hour and a half to get this far, and you know, I'd say it's really worth the trouble to just go ahead and pull it out. We're just going to take that one through bolt out. We're going to bring it up on top of the intake plenum. It's still going to be able to do its job there. So the sensor, from what I gathered, you know, obviously it looks like it's worn out and busted. This particular motor has a tick in the valve train over here somewhere. So it kind of tells me that we had issues with not getting oil changes in the proper time and stuff like that. Things get gummed up, things don't work as well, and they end up having clearance in there and it ticks. What I believe happened is that sensor was either bad or going bad, and that lifter tick was really kind of hammering away at it. You know, it's something where you can put your finger on the valve cover and you can actually feel it. So that's going to translate to vibration in that knock sensor, which is going to give you a false read. That false read is telling the computer back off the timing, and then you're going to end up with pulling a code, poor performance, poor fuel mileage, and so forth. So here we go. I did want to show you a few other things. As you can see down here, around this coolant passage right there, we're going to have a lot of corrosion up in this area. That's something we definitely need to clean out before we get everything reassembled. You're going to have corrosion all around the stud. This one right here, this is actually black with corrosion. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that. I'm going to wire brush it. I'm going to make sure it's not going to break on us when we go to reassemble it. Now over here, I do really want to commend the Japanese on the way they build their vehicles. They like to hide little bolt holes or bolts and stuff, and if there's one thing that they love just as much as vacuum lines and coolant hoses, it's going to be hidden bolts. This guy right here, this is the front of the lower intake manifold. Okay, looking at the top of the motor, here it is right here. My finger's on it right there. This little bolt right here is pulled out right here. Okay, there's just a little 8mm head bolt. It was the only 8mm socket that I used the entire trip here, but it's going to look just like these guys right here that go around the timing belt cover. Basically, just pull that out. I actually dropped mine, so I'm going to have to go fishing for it. But pull that out. Then you got the 8 bolts on the top, like I showed you before. So along the lines of that rusted bolt, that rusted stud that was here. This guy right here actually didn't want to come out. Okay, as you can see, this isn't shellac. This is actually rust paste. So got some cleaning up to do here. Not a big problem, but it did make for a big hassle because this didn't want to slide up when I took the nuts off. Quick trick that I use right here is to lock these two nuts together, and then I put a 12-point socket over both nuts, and I was able to turn it off. For anybody not familiar with that trick, what you're going to do is you're going to take 2 of these nuts. See if I can focus there. So you're going to take 2 nuts. I basically just took this one, I threaded it down onto the stud far enough that I could thread another nut down and have a full thread bite on there. Once they're together, you tighten this one, you loosen this one, you're locking them together. You want to lock it together enough that you're going to be able to pull it out without the nut coming loose, but you also want to not break that stud. Especially rusted ones, you're going to have some fatigue there, so just be really careful when doing that. If you feel it start to give, stop putting power on it because you're probably going to end up wrecking it. If I had sheared this off right there, I would have been completely screwed because this guy right here was basically cold welded together. So put the two, lock them against each other, and then I just put that 12mm socket over the whole thing. Fortunately, the points were exactly in the middle of each other, so that 12 point did slide right over it, not a problem, and it just came right out. Not a problem. Not a problem. It wasn't difficult at all getting it out there. Didn't strip it, anything like that. Issue I do have here. Look at all this corrosion around the coolant passage. Corrosion all around here. Okay, so these guys, if they weren't leaking, weeping, they're definitely getting ready to. So you want to seal these off. A lot of people are going to want to use RTV. I try to shy away from RTV. It is, I guess, more permanent, more waterproof, but I don't like it. It's sloppy. You can get pieces of it that go down into the coolant passages, plug your radiator. In fact, here RTV was used on the joint between the upper and lower plenum. I ended up with RTV that was actually falling off into here. You get that into your intake valve. I mean, not a huge deal, but you could bend stuff. You could bend a valve. You just don't want that kind of stuff in your motor. Okay. Next thing we do want to address is just the corrosion, general corrosion. Get the stuff cleaned off before you reassemble it. Make sure you have a good, clean surface. If you need to lubricate these things, I guess sometimes I've used grease in really, really tight spots and things like that. Just some spit. Get some spit on there. Get some coolant. Wipe it on there, and then get it nice and tight. I also tend to replace those crappy band style hose clamps with like a real hose clamp. It just makes life easier in general. It's just a pain in the butt, a huge hassle to have to deal with that crap, especially in those tight areas. This one in particular, this was a very tight area. This was a huge hassle to get out. I ended up having to use a screwdriver and to pry it up and then pull it out. So just to recap, make sure you get everything cleaned up really well. Make sure you get your gasket mating surfaces flat, you don't have any debris in there. Get it clean. Avoid getting anything in the cylinders. I would even say go as far as blowing them out with some air or something like that. If you didn't listen and you did drop a bunch of coolant, you didn't drain the coolant or whatever, one thing that you can do, if you did get coolant in a cylinder and you're worried about hydrolocking or something like that, what I would suggest is to pull the spark plugs, give the motor a quick spin. Even if you do it like this right here, you're not actually going to hurt anything. It might throw a trouble code or something like that because we have a whole lot of stuff not hooked up. But you spin that motor, it's going to shoot geysers of coolant out those spark plug holes, and then that way at least you're safe. You're not going to bend a rod or anything stupid like that. So I think that's about it. I'm just going to go ahead and clean everything up. Just one last thing. We talked about using sealant earlier. As opposed to RTV, I tend to use this stuff, this high-tech spray gasket. The reason I like this is because you get it sprayed on there, you let it dry for a few minutes, you put it on there, and it's basically like gluing the part in place. It makes it a whole lot easier when you're reassembling stuff because you can get those gaskets on there. They're not going anywhere. You sandwich it together before it dries fully, and then you have a good seal, and it was a lot easier to put together as opposed to RTV where sometimes it might sag or move a little bit, and then you have some low spots of RTV, or as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have just big beads of RTV coming out, which tends to be counterproductive. It's kind of gross. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and stop the filming. Putting it all back together is essentially the same as before. Just wish me luck. It's my first one doing it here, so hopefully when I get it back together, it's going to run without any issues.